Alright, so I've been playing Mario games longer than I can remember. I essentially grew up on Mario fanfiction sites, and am far more invested in the nonsense world of the Mushroom Kingdom than is healthy. Which is tough because Mario games are very light on story. They normally focus on fun, breezy gameplay, and almost never worry about continuity or character growth, which means I clung to every scrap of world building that I could, which is why the Mario RPG games were always a big deal to me. They're this opportunity for the world of Mario to dig a little deeper into its lore and create robust and fully realized stories. The actual games rarely do this though. I can't call any of the Mario RPGs bad exactly. They're all polished and well made, but what you think about any given Mario RPG depends a lot on what you want out of that experience. For me, what I value most are interesting scenarios and characters that flesh out the world. I want memorable adventures, the sort of stuff that would serve as inspiration for those fanfics I tried to write as a kid. Gameplay is important too, obviously, but what an RPG can offer that the mainline platformers cannot is narrative depth. I want that deep lore. I want to peer into the soul of Mario and understand his anguish. And most importantly, I want to do literary analysis of Nintendo games. But that's hard to do if all of the in-game text could fit on a postcard. I've played every Mario RPG released up to this point. That's not necessarily a point of pride, but it is a fact that you and I both have to live with. And the only real thing I can do with my life now is go ahead and rank every single one of those games based on what I thought of the story, the quality of the game mechanics, and how replayable I think they are. You are entitled to your own opinion, and if you disagree, you can go and make your own video. Here we go! Number 13, Mario and Luigi Dream Team. Alright, so coming in last place is the Mario RPG that I got almost no joy out of. Mario and Luigi Dream Team is a game with gorgeous sprite work and animation. It's a game with an interesting premise. Explore the subconscious dream world of Luigi. It even had an interesting design for its villain, Antasma. But despite all of this, I found the game to be a miserable slog. My chief complaint is the writing. The game has a tendency to set up these skit scenes where Mario and Luigi meet a kooky but unremarkable character who has exactly one joke. And then they drive that one joke as far into the ground as they can. These frequent and interminable scenes often have the Mario brothers standing around while the NPC belavers their chosen gag, which almost never got me to crack a smile. Dream Team is the longest Mario and Luigi game, offering about 40 hours of content to get through the main story campaign, and around 60 hours if you 100% it. But you really feel that added runtime as every scene feels dragged out. And maybe I could forgive the bad pacing if the story were interesting, but I find it to be a missed opportunity. The whole dream world concept is underutilized. It isn't used to flesh out Luigi as a character, and it doesn't even make for a very good parallel world mechanic. The dream world is broken up into dozens of 2D sections that all look and play the same. You can prod Luigi's sleeping face with a stylus to alter the terrain and solve some puzzles, but since the design of the dream world is very abstract and samey, none of it feels very meaningful. And that's my biggest problem with the game. I never felt compelled to continue. The combat is also a low point for the series. Mario and Luigi games in general have this problem where combat tends to drag because every special attack and every enemy attack animation is its own minigame, and it pulls focus away from tactics of combat and can make every encounter feel like an ordeal. And Dream Team has some of the longest attack animations in the series, and it gets downright tedious when you're just trying to get through your commute to solve a boring puzzle to get another chatty cutscene as your reward. Apart from poking Luigi's sleeping face, the game also has flashy giant Luigi gimmick battles, but these are so simple and so divorced from the core gameplay mechanics that they never feel very climactic. I'm hard on this game because I feel it squandered what good ideas it had. The premise is interesting, but ultimately the nicest thing I can say about the game is that it's pretty. Number 12? Mario and Luigi Paper Jam. So Paper Jam has similar problems to Dream Team, but I find it far less offensive. The pace of combat feels better balanced, with the attack minigames only becoming a huge nuisance in the tail end of the game. The addition of Paper Mario to the combat system is mostly superficial. Paper Mario brings battle cards into the mix, a deck you can build of special attacks, buffs, and debuffs that use star points you accumulate by fighting. Paper Mario has a few unique properties in battle, but mostly functions as a third-party member in the existing Mario and Luigi combat system. Combat is decently satisfying, and I actually really like the boss fight music. The premise is the major weak point. The concept is that the world of Paper Mario exists inside of a book inside of the normal Mario universe, which is a retcon that kind of cheapens all of the characters and events in the Paper Mario games, but does allow for a crossover game to happen. The problem with a crossover game is that none of the unique characters from the Mario and Luigi series or the Paper Mario series are utilized. The game focuses on having the core cast interact with the parallel versions of themselves, but the dialogue writing isn't functionally any different between regular and paper versions of the characters. You just have multiple of the same character talking to each other. This can sometimes be a little interesting, like how Bowser and Paper Bowser are jerks to each other, while other characters like Peach and Bowser Jr. love hanging out with their paper selves. Maybe a little too much sometimes. But the developer, Alpha Dream, already did something similar with Partners in Time, which managed a similar dynamic with time travel. I like that Toadette and the Koopalings get more screen time than usual, but very little is done with the cast overall. The stakes of the story aren't that much higher than your standard Mario platformer. There are now 2 Bowsers to stop and 2 princesses to save. The plot doesn't go anywhere unexpected. The world isn't in any more peril than usual. The Bowsers create some cardboard papercraft terrain which serves as roadblocks and random locations to inconvenience you, but that's about it. There's a few moments where they tease the idea of the book containing the Paper Mario world being destroyed, but the villains don't ever have any motive to follow through on that. The bulk of the main plot centers on going around saving paper toads. There's nothing wrong with the gameplay attached to these segments, but makes for a dull story. The dialogue isn't aggressively unfunny like in Dream Team, just uninspired. The best comedy in the game is actually in the animation. Mario, Luigi, and Paper Mario express themselves mostly through pantomime, and those bits land much more often than the written gags. I went into Paper Jam expecting it to be a boring slog like Dream Team, but it's actually a decent game. Bland story, but the gameplay is perfectly serviceable. Number 11? Paper Mario Sticker Star. Alright, here's the whipping boy for the Paper Mario fandom. Most people cite this game as the turning point where the series strayed too far from what made it good. And yeah, this is where it feels like Nintendo jumped to the conclusion that what people like about Paper Mario is the paper aesthetic as opposed to the story or the characters. This is the game where Nintendo first replaced every defined character with interchangeable toads and swapped out all of the JRPG growth mechanics for experimental systems based around disposable attacks. But I didn't put this on the absolute bottom of this ranking. What gives? Even though Sticker Star embodies the questionable direction the franchise has taken in recent years, what I like about the game is that it's breezy and short. If I ask myself, would I play this game again? The fact that I can knock it out in half the time that it'd take to play Dream Team is a plus. Now, it's over quick is not a selling point in and of its own, but hear me out. If I put aside my expectations about what I think a Mario RPG should be, and just approach the game on its own terms, then the gameplay isn't bad. It's more about resource management than stat building, there is strategy in using stickers effectively. I was surprised that the final boss actually posed a serious challenge. That said, the game isn't exactly great. The story and characters are very superficial. It wants to structure itself more like a platformer with stages and secret exits, which does not help make the world feel like a lived-in space. Most of the early boss fights are centered around bringing the right special sticker to solve a puzzle, but limited inventory space and the fact that every sticker is single use means a fight may require you to trek all the way back to Decalburg to buy or make the correct sticker, and then go through the dungeon again to give the boss another shot. Since there's no experience system, there's no incentive to get into fights because they waste resources. That's okay if you know to avoid fights, but backtracking is still a slog here. The writing is roughly as bland as it is in Paper Jam. But Sticker Star feels a bit more original, in part because Paper Jam feels derivative while Sticker Star was bold enough to try and reinvent the Mario RPG. Sticker Star made a lot of fans angry, but I respect it for trying something new. If you treat Sticker Star as an adventure game instead of an RPG, you'll get more enjoyment out of it. It has a couple of fun scenarios and puzzles, and I'd eventually be willing to play it again. Not amazing, not awful. Number 10? Mario and Luigi, Bowser's Inside Story. Okay, so this ranking is going to be controversial. Bowser's Inside Story is a lot of people's second favorite Mario and Luigi game, and other people even argue it's the best one. And for good reason. This game has the most bonkers and creative premise of any of the Mario and Luigi games. The bros spend the majority of the game inside Bowser's body, which acts as a hub dungeon for you to explore while you control Bowser in the overworld. It's an interesting take on the dual world design formula that Nintendo loves. This is also arguably the best use of making Bowser controllable for longer than a quick gag. But as inventive as the game's concept is, I'm not a fan of how it executes on its plot. The story is very meandering, with Bowser wandering around and getting into random trouble and kooky encounters, and it feels aimless. A lot of the scenarios are contrived so Bowser gets stuck and Mario and Luigi have to do something special to his body to progress. Fawful returns as the main villain of this game, stealing Bowser's castle. Problem is, I don't like Fawful much as a character. I had my fill of his English stick in the first game, and I was never that interested in seeing him come back. But I will give this game points for just being very different and breaking from the collect the MacGuffin formula. My main problem with Bowser's Inside Story is that I don't find the actual adventure that compelling. I love how out there the game is with its ideas, but the story is too much like Fawful himself in that it's too weird and random. There's also the fact that, conceptually, it feels like one of the developers snuck their barely disguised vor fetish into the core gameplay. The world of Bowser's body is this surreal and sanitized landscape that has no actual basis in biology, a very cartoony idea of eating someone alive. There's also the inflation demonstrated by Blorb's disease. If you're into that stuff, whatever, don't let me rain on your parade. I just find it very distracting because the internet has trained me to consider the sexual connotation of these things. Bowser's Inside Story is the first game so far that I would describe as special. Even if the execution is wonky and the writing can be aimless or irritating, it's unique, and that counts for something. Number 9. Mario and Luigi, Partners in Time. Alright, so I have to justify why I think Partners in Time is better than Bowser's Inside Story. And a lot of it comes down to it just having a coherent story structure. Which is surprising because almost all media that involves time travel features convoluted plots as well. But Partners in Time uses time travel in a very superficial way. The game only really touches on the idea of the past affecting the future once, with Dr. Egad coming up with an idea for an invention. The past is just a conceit to have a dual world mechanic and to incorporate the baby characters. And I'll stop here to say flat out that having baby versions of all the main Mario characters is a dumb concept. I assume the idea came out of Yoshi's Island games introducing them, and that idea spreading to the spin-off party games, and that leading to the impulse to do something more with them in an actual story. Time travel is just the excuse to make this happen. Mario writing is not sophisticated enough to do anything ambitious with the trope of time travel, and that's kind of its saving grace. The story is actually about an alien invasion, not about the nature of causality. Both of these tropes, alien invasion and time travel, are used in pretty basic Saturday morning cartoon style. But they both add flavor to a solid enough RPG adventure and shows off more personality than the likes of Paper Jam while feeling more narratively focused than Bowser's Inside Story. The Shroobs feel like an actual threat, abducting people, terraforming the kingdom, and draining people of their life force. The story follows the usual collect the MacGuffin structure. But the set pieces you visit have a bit more flair than the usual grass, desert, forest, tundra, lava biomes. The Vim Factory and the Ruined Mushroom Kingdom, Thwomp Volcano, Star Hill, and the Shroob Mothership all feel like new material. I also like that Partners in Time is more reasonable than its siblings about keeping attack animations and minigames brief. Traversal of the world map is not quite as annoying as it is in Superstar Saga also. Having 4 characters rather than 2 can get a little mind-bending on occasion, but overall I think this might be my favorite iteration of Mario & Luigi combat mechanics. I'm not going to argue that Partners in Time is a must-play title. The plot is shallow, and it doesn't really execute on its main concept in a meaningful way. I just flat out had more fun with it than the preceding games on this list. If the rankings so far haven't made it clear, the Mario & Luigi series is not my favorite style of Mario RPG, but this one is alright in my book. Number 8, Paper Mario Color Splash. Oof, Color Splash had it rough on release. The Wii U was one of Nintendo's worst performing platforms, and this game chose to double down on a lot of the design ideas of Sticker Star that fans hated. Instead of stickers, the game focuses on building decks of disposable battle cards. The control scheme of selecting cards on the gamepad was all kinds of wonky, and it followed the same coarse clear structure as Sticker Star that apes at the platforming games. But here's the thing. I actually really like the dialogue in this game. Color Splash has a lot of good gags. I'm honestly willing to put up with a lot of frustration in gameplay if a game can make me laugh. I can't defend the story structure as much, as each scenario is laid out like a comedy skit. The world itself doesn't feel that concrete or lived in, and the scenarios feel improvised. It's more like a backdrop for the hijinks. But the skits themselves are charming, and the jokes are actually funny. Paint is the main gimmick in the game. Bowser's minions are draining the color from the world, and you can restore it by smacking terrain with your hammer. This sets off a very compulsive part of my brain that takes a lot of satisfaction out of restoring every square inch of the world. Color being drained from the world is a nice visual way to communicate ruin, but I don't think the concept is otherwise used to make that grand of an adventure. Like in Sticker Star, most of the characters are just regular toads and minions. The Koopalings are brought back and get to be actual characters at least, but most of the game is in surface of one-off jokes. Witty jokes, mind you. I just wish the story had some depth to it. The gameplay is highly experimental, and I don't mind. It's not quite as satisfying as conventional RPG gameplay. Like Sticker Star, there's not much incentive to get into fights as they use up your stock of attacks. You can level up your paint hammer, but your combat ability is tied to your cards. Color Splash is a fun game, but it doesn't offer the same scope of adventure or story that the remaining games in this list do. I would describe this one as cute, underrated, funny, but still missing something vital. Number 7. Super Paper Mario. This game marks the first warning sign that the Paper Mario games were drifting towards a focus on trying to be clever with the mechanics of flat characters and the aesthetics of paper. In this game, the RPG battles are stripped out and replaced with standard jump-on enemies platforming, except you have this gimmick where you can turn a 2D level into a 3D space, letting you solve puzzles that play on perspective tricks. The problem with making the game play like a platformer is that Mario and the other party members still control like it's an RPG game. Simple, stiff, but serviceable movement controls instead of the fluid and dynamic physics of the mainline games. Combat is more about twitch skill instead of being tactical or turn-based. It's not exactly a platformer, and it's not exactly an RPG. It's an adventure game with elements of both welded on. An awkward hybrid. So, what the game wants most is to wow you when you switch from 2D to 3D, and your whole understanding of a level changes. And there's plenty of moments where it did catch me off guard, but I don't think those moments quite make up for the weak core gameplay. Another common criticism for the game is that the visual design for a lot of the worlds and characters in the game is lackluster. The developers went for this aesthetic where things are made out of simple, crude shapes. It tends to look super basic compared to the neat characters seen in the first two Paper Mario games. But, in spite of all of the scraping, I still rate this game above half of all the other Mario RPG games made. Why is that? It's because I think that even with the RPG mechanics stripped out, this game still clings to the spirit of a big RPG adventure. You go on a multiverse hopping quest to stop a world-ending crisis. The places you visit tread new ground for the franchise, with the underwear in particular being a big highlight. The game takes a lot of weird ideas and runs with them, but unlike Bowser's Inside Story, it has a more concrete structure. It's the tired collect the MacGuffin structure, but that at least leaves you with a sense that the story is building towards something. And to the game's credit, the plot does throw some curveballs at you. And if I'm being honest, 90% of the reason I rate this game so highly is because I really like the villains. Count Bleck, Mimi, O-Chunks, Nastasia, Dimentio, and Mr. L are all just fun characters, and they basically carry the game for me. Every partner character you recruit is forgettable, but the bad guys each have memorable personalities. Super Paper Mario has a lot of fanfic energy. A lot of the tropes it uses are absurd in their attempts to be big and epic. There is a book of prophecy called The Dark Prognosticus. It never reaches the same heights as the games that came before it, but it feels like it's sincerely trying, and I appreciate that. When I first played this game, I bought it off of a friend who said that they enjoyed it, but they thought that they would never play it again. I wound up agreeing with that assessment when I traded my copy away. But later I found myself nostalgic enough to want to rebuy the thing, and I think that counts for something. Number 6. Mario & Rabbids Kingdom Battle. When this game was announced, I thought I would hate it. I find Ubisoft's Rabbids irritating, and the concept of a crossover in a tactical turn-based RPG shooter to be a bizarre choice. But to my shock, the game works surprisingly well. The gameplay is in the style of XCOM, Enemy Unknown, which again is weird for a Mario game. You take cover and use weapons and guns and gadgets to outsmart your enemies. The combat design is really tight and well balanced, with every battle feeling like a puzzle with optimized solutions. It's just really crunchy and requires you to be inventive with the mechanics. Coming up with effective strategies and getting gold ranks on levels is tremendously satisfying. Also, to my surprise, they managed to make the Rabbid version of the Mario characters appealing. I did not expect to walk away liking Rabbid Peach as much as I did. The animation is great and the gags are solid, if occasionally a bit crude. The downside to Kingdom Battle is that the story is ultimately just an excuse for the gameplay. And despite character progression and equipment economy and stats, I hesitated to consider this an RPG because the story is not really the focus. It's not really an adventure so much as a gauntlet of fun challenges. But plenty of Mario RPGs have superficial stories, and honestly, I think the gameplay of this one is too good to exclude from the list. Number 5, Paper Mario Origami King. After Sticker Star, Color Splash, and Paper Jam, a lot of people understandably lost faith in the Paper Mario franchise. It felt like an essential element was lost. The series became more about the gimmicks and the theming of Paper, even though the aesthetic was always secondary to what the fans wanted, a solid RPG adventure set in the Mario universe. I don't know that Origami King will convince some diehard fans that it is a return to form. It embraces a lot of the choices the newer games have adopted, an emphasis on gimmicks and aesthetics, disposable attack commands and no experience system, a world populated primarily by generic toads. All the warning signs are here, but Origami King is in my top 5 for a reason. It takes the thing I liked best about Color Splash, the legitimately funny dialogue, and it grounds it in a much more substantial world. We're not selecting one-off stages, aping at being a platformer Mario. It's one interconnected world again. And the story has actual weight to it this time. It plays with a surprising amount of horror and actually has some themes, including death and sacrifice. Now, the game is still super goofy, but no longer treating the story as irrelevant. The adventure has a lot of interesting set pieces, stuff that goes beyond just the theming of grass, water, lava worlds. Places like Shogun Studios and Shangri Spa, or the game deciding to be Wind Waker for a while, all feel like the sort of things that could inspire fanfiction. When you combine substance in the story with the charm of the written dialogue, I love it. Unlike Sticker Star, and to a lesser degree Color Splash, Origami King allows itself to have original characters. Nothing on the scale of Thousand Year Door, where every NPC felt like it could be someone's OC, but there are toads with names and distinct personalities, and your partner characters are all great too. I was very worried that the villains would be dull, as the game pits you against paper crafting tools like staplers and scissors and a hole punch. But the game actually makes these bosses into characters and sells their personality via both the written dialogue and the animation. They're all good. But the combat is going to be a hurdle for a lot of people. The ring battles feel very experimental, being more puzzles than normal RPG combat. I enjoyed them overall. Knowing that EXP wasn't a thing, I knew to avoid combat if I got tired of it. The puzzles got much more taxing towards the end of the game, but the game was ultimately short enough that they didn't overstay their welcome. The boss fights, however, managed to feel awesome in large part thanks to amazing music and animation. The combat system requires you to have an open mind to enjoy it. I don't think I would want them to iterate on this idea again, but I enjoyed it for what it was. I was deeply anxious about Origami King when it was announced, but it managed to become one of my favorites. I don't know if most people will agree with me, but I do think the game is worth giving a chance. Number 4? Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. Alright, we're in the territory of the best now. These titles are the ones I can recommend without qualification. In 2003, Superstar Saga came out of nowhere and offered a new and bombastic take on the Mario RPG concept. This adventure in the Bean Bean Kingdom is brimming with adventure and charm, with lots of bold and unique characters in a new setting that had a totally different vibe from the boilerplate Mario worlds. Peasley, Lady Llama, Queen Bean, Cacletta, and even Fawful were big personalities. The combat system took the timed hit system of Mario RPG and Paper Mario and fleshed them out more, putting a much greater emphasis on actively counterattacking during enemy turns. Every Mario and Luigi game that came after this cribbed from this template. But this first title kept the pace of combat snappy and isn't bogged down by mid-battle minigames. It was very inventive, but each of its sequels was more by the numbers than the last. Superstar Saga relies on its core gameplay and characters, whereas its follow-ups relied increasingly on gimmicks. My main complaints with this game are that the bros attacks feel extremely finicky. Unless you go out of your way to memorize the timing on each and every one of them, it feels like a waste of a turn to use them. Otherwise, traversing the overworld becomes a chore as you require all of your abilities. You have to use the shoulder buttons to cycle between jumping, hammers, fire and electric attacks, the spin jump, the high jump, the Luigi dunk, the mini Mario, running, and sidestepping, all while the maps become increasingly convoluted. It's not intolerable or anything, but the game would have benefited from being on a platform with more buttons. Superstar Saga is overall very solid, and it feels like a genuine adventure. It absolutely started its series with a bang, so it's a little too bad that none of the sequels really lived up to the expectations set by this one. It's also noteworthy that Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story, the fan favorites for the series, got remakes in the Dream Team and Paper Jam style. These new versions look gorgeous, although they do sacrifice a bunch of small visual flourishes from the original games. They also add in bonus side campaigns called Bowser's Minions and Junior's Journey. But the gameplay of these modes is tedious and involves a lot of waiting around. They're not great selling points on their own, but they're nice add-ons. Number 3, Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. Full disclosure, Legend of the Seven Stars is the Mario RPG I have replayed the most. I have some thick nostalgia for it, and I'd probably stick it at the top of this list if I weren't forcing myself to be critical. Mario RPG, as the name suggests, was the first game to try and turn the Mario universe into an RPG. It introduced the whole concept of time hits to the series, which was a great idea to make turn-based combat more engaging. My favorite thing about the game is that it is a legitimate globe-trotting adventure across an imaginative array of unique areas. This was the first team-up between Mario and Bowser to take on a world-ending threat in the form of the Smithy Gang, which was mind-blowing as a kid. It does exactly what I want a Mario RPG to do. It takes this setting and it fleshes out with characters and actual storytelling. It's not narratively deep or anything, none of these games are, but it's enough to add weight and meaning to the adventure. Mallow and Gino were great characters, and it feels like a shame that they've never been revisited. I'm one of those chumps who wants Gino in Smash, even though it's arguably a bad idea. Gino as a character has a cool design and concept, but in practice he's a stoic exposition machine. Mallow is the character who has an actual arc, starting as a hapless crybaby and becoming self-confident. What he lacks for in charisma, he makes up for in substance. The rest of the cast, from Booster to Jonathan Jones to Smithy's lieutenant to Belome and even Chef Tort, are striking and memorable. This game is the gold standard that I compare the rest of these games against. It gave me what I wanted, and every time I pick one of these games up, I hope to recapture the magic I find here. But that said, this game isn't perfect. The most glaring issue is how dated the pre-rendered CGI graphics look now. It was mind-blowing to see the pseudo 3D on the SNES back in the day, but now the aesthetic looks ugly. There's also the issue that the world and details of Mario RPG feel very off-model. This was before Nintendo controlled the Mario brand that tightly, and Squaresoft was entrusted with lots of creative control. There's tons of monsters and locations and ideas that don't quite fit with modern Mario. The Scarecrow status effect in particular feels like a bizarre idea. That weirdness is part of why I like the game, but it's hard to consider this game the definitive Mario RPG when it feels so out of step with the rest of the franchise. There's also the fact that the script, while loaded with personality for an SNES game, is not nearly as polished as later titles. Mechanically, as innovative as the timed hit system was, this was the first attempt at the concept, and it's not the best implementation. You get very little feedback on if the timing of your button presses are right. On some moves, I'm not sure if I'm doing it right or if I'm experiencing a placebo effect. Every game after this does this better. The core RPG combat is excellent, but it also is very much in the vein of Final Fantasy, and I think Nintendo was right to try and create a more distinct gameplay identity for Mario RPGs. I love this game, in part because I also love Final Fantasy, but if I'm honest with myself, then these next couple games do a much better job of capturing the flavor of the Mario setting in this genre. Number 2. Paper Mario. If I haven't already sparked some kind of argument in the comments, then the placement of these final rankings just might. Everything in the top 5 is so good that I think their order could shuffle based on the whims of my mood. The original Paper Mario is good, phenomenal even, but in terms of what I am looking for in this list, it doesn't quite reach the slot of number 1. What Paper Mario has over Mario RPG is that Paper Mario feels like a quintessential game. It embodies the goofy, friendly tone of a Mario story, and marries it to RPG mechanics that feel like a fit for the universe. The story is the same MacGuffin hunt for stars, but scales the scope back to make it a Mario vs. Bowser story, and pits Mario against episodic challenges and adventures. Even if Mario RPG did this first, I would argue Paper Mario did a more concrete job of setting the template. When this game first came out, I resented it a little bit because it felt like a dumbing down. The mechanics felt simpler, like Nintendo was condescending to me. There was much better visual and mechanical feedback for timed hits, but they also felt so spelled out as to become repetitive. But my appreciation for the game opened up in the back half. Although the game uses small numbers and a 2-active party system, there was a surprising amount of tactical depth in the combat and badge system. The game does feel slow early on, because it takes a while to ramp up the difficulty, but it also serves as a kinder introduction to the genre than Legend of the Seven Stars. The localization is a step up over Mario RPG. It's not quite as wild and out there, but it offers a lived-in world where you can meet named Koopas and Toads with well-defined personalities. Your party members are also all charming, if a bit simple and absent of real growth. This game is breezy, easy to replay over and over, it's loaded with charm, and the mechanics are deceptively simple. It's overall just a super solid game that hits every benchmark for what this sort of game can and should be. Where this game falls short is in how it ultimately feels basic. It hits every checkmark for a good Mario RPG, but doesn't push the narrative boundary. It doesn't aspire to add meaning or gravity to the Mario universe, which is the one thing that the game in the number 1 slot does best. And number 1. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. The city of Rogueport is a run-down, dirty slum home to thieves and poverty. A gallows hangs in the town square. There is a crime syndicate of Pianta Yakuza pulling the strings from the shadows. It's built on the ruins of a city destroyed 1,000 years ago, and you can explore those ruins yourself. There is a level of detail here, a level of grittiness under the Happy Mario charm that lends a sense of reality to the setting that no Mario game after 1,000-Year Door has managed to recapture. Your companions feel more fleshed out than they did in the first Paper Mario. Goombella has 3 times the personality of Goombario. Bobbery has a tragic backstory. Vivian escapes from the abuse of her sisters. The Yoshi kid, Gonzalez Jr., is born in a fighting pit and acts like it. The game is more willing to imply that there is tragedy or hardship in the world. There's a dark edge to the humor that comes out here and there, and that was exciting to see at an age when I was anxious to see the Mario games grow up alongside me. At least a little bit. I don't know that it would have been the right creative choice for Nintendo to commit to the path of letting Mario get deeper and darker and heavier with time. It would be all too easy to tip over into farce. This game strikes a good balance and manages to keep things light while still winking at us more jaded adults. The script and the localization in this game is arguably the best, with Origami King being its main competition. Color Splash has hilarious dialogue, but lacks the oomph of actual storytelling found here. 1,000-Year Door plays with the structure set up by the first Paper Mario, and loves to subvert your expectations. Super Paper Mario tried to pull similar tricks, but had diminishing returns. Thousand Year Door hits that sweet spot where you can take the lore and the setting of Mario seriously, and it not feel like a departure from the spirit of the games. It plays with the designs of the standard Mario enemies and illustrates how they can be made into characters or even OCs. It's exactly the sort of game that would inspire a helpless kid like me into writing fanfiction, and that's why I ranked it number 1. That said, the game has its faults. Thousand Year Door is not as easy to replay as the other games in the top 5. Sections like the Glitz Pit, where you have to marathon repetitive fights, or the Excess Express, where you basically have to wander around talking to the right NPCs to advance the plot, can be a real slog to revisit. There's quite a bit of backtracking in the game too, especially if you do all the side quests, and it can wear you pretty thin. Your party members get next to no development after they join your party. The game is not nearly as flawless as most of the diehard fans remember, but it is meaty. It takes the conservative storytelling and design of Paper Mario and takes it in bold and cheeky directions. It's the sort of thing that a lot of us wanted to see more of. Which is why I get excited whenever we catch a whiff of this creativity in the other games. If I were going to tell somebody what one single Mario RPG they should play, assuming they're not going to play any of the others, it would be this game. Now, Nintendo may never make another game like Thousand Year Door, and that's okay. But I think they're heading in the right direction with Origami King. Ideally, what I'd like is for Nintendo to create a whole new spin-off Mario RPG series and capture the novel energy of something like the first Mario and Luigi. I get why that novelty is rare. Originality is hard and risky, but without creative vision we end up with blander titles like Paper Jam and Sticker Star. Those games aren't bad though. I admit I feel a lot more charitable towards them than most. But I admit I'm always going to be hungry for another taste of that real adventure that I got from Mario RPG and Thousand Year Door, and I'm just waiting to get another bite. Anyway, if you disagree with my rankings, feel free to argue your case for why Dream Team is actually great in the comments. Do the usual YouTube thing and interact with this video. Coo and coddle me so that I feel motivated to make more videos. I need you to soothe my ego. Oh, and while I've got your attention, maybe check out my other projects. I do a webcomic with my husband called Jack Beloved. It's a slow burn enemies to lover fantasy romance story. In it, a sarcastic demon and a tiny himbo soldier fall in love. You can check that out at jackbeloved.com, and it's also on Tapas and Webtoons. If you want to see my other personal projects, my portfolio site is at mewd.net. And if you want more Mario content in particular, I'm going to link to my overwhelmingly wholesome Mario and Peach fanfic as well. Check out the links to that and the other stuff in the description. Anyway, thanks for listening, and remember to say no to fascism. Bye!